At the end of the experiment, the teenager could still stand, speak, and answer questions. To the cameras surrounding him, he looked almost normal. And that appearance created the most misleading version of his story, because by then, his attention, memory, and judgment were already breaking apart. The disturbing question was not simply whether he could stay awake, it was how long he could keep looking functional while his mind became less reliable. In December 1963, a 17-year-old student in San Diego decided to find out how far that feeling could go. His name was Randy Gardner, and what began as an idea for a school science fair came down to one very simple question. How long could a person remain awake? By the fourth day, ordinary objects could seem like something else. His memory was slipping. His mood could change without warning, and the most unsettling part was this. He had not even reached the halfway point. So how long did he last? The answer was 264 hours, 11 full days without ordinary sleep. This is the documented story of what happened inside those hours. This is long enough. He recently moved to San Diego with his military family. He later described himself as the kind of science-obsessed student who entered a fair wherever the family lived. He wanted a project that would stand out. A radio personality named Tom Rounds had reportedly remained awake for 260 hours. Randy's plan was to go a little longer, not in a laboratory, not under a university protocol, during Christmas vacation, with help from two school friends. His friends, Bruce McAllister and Joe Marciano, worked in shifts. While one watched Randy, the other slept. Randy understood the weakness in the plan immediately. If he was ever left alone, he would probably give in. So he stayed away from beds. He tried to remain standing. They talked, walked, played games, and kept records as the hours accumulated. At first, it felt surprisingly manageable. The first 2 days were the easy part, at least compared with what followed. Randy could still talk, joke, and take part in the project. But being awake is not the same as functioning normally. Attention becomes less reliable. Reaction time slows. Small errors begin to appear, often before the exhausted person understands how impaired they have become. The experiment was already changing him. It just did not look dramatic yet. By day 3, the experiment no longer felt harmless. Randy later remembered waking hours filled with nausea. For reasons he could not fully explain, oranges and tangerines seemed to make it easier to tolerate. His friends could keep his body moving, but they could not make his mind work the way it had before. Forming a thought, holding it, and turning it into a sentence was becoming more difficult. Then the story escaped the bedroom. Reporters began showing up, and the attention actually helped. New faces, new questions, something different to keep Randy engaged. A Stanford sleep researcher named William Dement traveled to San Diego and joined the vigil. A Navy medical officer, John Ross, also examined Randy. The school project had not become a controlled clinical trial, but it was now being watched far more closely than Randy and his friends had ever planned. Around the 4th day, perception itself became unreliable. Reports describe moments in which Randy misinterpreted what he saw and briefly imagined that he was a famous football player. These were not constant horror movie hallucinations. His mind moved in and out of clarity. At one moment, he could understand where he was. At another, an ordinary impression could be transformed into something that was not there. That unevenness made the decline more disturbing, not less. Memory was also beginning to lose its grip. Randy could hear a question, begin answering it, and then lose the thought before reaching the end. His mood became unpredictable. He could be cooperative, then suddenly irritable. Years later, he remembered having an extremely short fuse, especially when reporters asked the same questions again and again. This is what severe sleep loss often does. It weakens the variabilities we use to notice and control our own behavior. And yet Randy did not simply get worse in a smooth, predictable line. Some hours were much harder than others. The early morning could feel unbearable. Later, he might seem strangely more alert. And yet Randy did not simply get worse in a smooth, predictable line. Some hours were much harder than others. The early morning could feel unbearable. Later, he might seem strangely more alert. That does not mean the missing sleep had been restored. The body's internal clock can temporarily push alertness upward, even while sleep pressure continues to build underneath it. So an exhausted person may look improved for a while just before their attention collapses again. This helps explain one of the strangest details in the story. Even late in the attempt, Randy could still play basketball, go for drives, and perform surprisingly well at pinball. He later said the physical activities were not the main problem. Mentally, however, everything was going downhill. A familiar, stimulating game could hold his attention for a moment. A quiet or repetitive mental task could fall apart. Looking capable was not the same as being unimpaired. By the 11th day, Randy's attention had become extremely fragile. In one often cited test, he was asked to count backward from 100 by sevens. 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65. Then he stopped. When the examiner asked why, Randy said he had forgotten what he was doing. In the early hours of January 8, 1964, the attempt ended. Cameras and reporters surrounded a teenage boy who had now been awake for 264 hours. He could stand, he could speak, he could answer questions, and that outward appearance created the most persistent myth about the experiment, that 11 days without sleep had barely affected him. The observations made during the vigil tell a very different story. Afterward, Randy was taken to a naval hospital so researchers could record his recovery sleep. He slept for a little over 14 hours. When he woke, he said he felt groggy, but not dramatically different from someone waking after an ordinary long night. Over the following recovery nights, researchers observed a marked increase in REM sleep. His brain was not simply replacing every lost hour, one by one. Recovery was more selective than that. The published psychiatric report made an important distinction. Randy developed major behavioral and perceptual changes, but the researchers wrote that a full sleep deprivation psychosis did not develop. That does not mean the experiment was safe. It means one healthy 17-year-old in one unusual situation did not follow the most extreme possible course. One person cannot define a safe limit for everyone else, and this experiment never established one. Modern sleep research helps explain why Randy could appear normal in one moment and fail a simple task in the next. Sleep loss makes attention unstable. Reaction time slows. Modern sleep research helps explain why Randy could appear normal in one moment and fail a simple task in the next, realizing they have fallen asleep at all. The dangerous part is not only feeling tired, it is becoming less reliable while still believing you are capable. You do not need to stay awake for 11 days to become dangerously impaired. U.S. occupational safety guidance compares 24 hours awake with the performance impairment associated with a blood alcohol concentration of roughly 0.10. And unlike Randy, most sleep-deprived people are not surrounded by friends, researchers, and cameras. They may be driving, working, or making decisions that affect someone else. Randy returned to ordinary life, and the project won first place at the science fair. For years, the ending sounded reassuring. He slept, recovered, and moved on. Decades later, however, Randy described a serious period of insomnia. He personally wondered whether his teenage stunt had somehow returned to haunt him. There is no evidence that proves the experiment caused that later insomnia. The problem appeared many years afterward, and a single life story cannot establish cause and effect. But Randy's own conclusion was much simpler. He would never attempt it again. Others later claimed longer periods without sleep, so Randy is not the final record holder. But his case remains one of the best documented. In 1997, Guinness World Records stopped monitoring deliberate sleeplessness records because of the inherent danger. There would be no responsible finish line and no safe reason to keep moving it. The real lesson of Randy Gardner's experiment is not that a person can remain awake for 11 days. It is that the exhausted mind can look functional while attention, memory, and judgment are already breaking into pieces. Randy stayed awake long enough for those failures to become impossible to ignore. Most of us begin paying the same debt much sooner. Every choice changes something, eventually.